Hi everyone, welcome back to the studio. I'm Lindy Whitten, and today we're going to be talking about how to add contrast to your paintings. So this could be a pastel painting or it could be an acrylic. I'm going to be doing this and then I'm going to be following on with a pastel painting, but you can take the same ideas and use them in acrylics or any other medium for that matter. When we think about contrast, we think immediately of black and white. Black and white, that's a lovely contrasting photo up there of two zebras. But there's so many aspects of contrast, so many different ways you can add contrast to your paintings, and that's what makes them really interesting. So if we start off with the simple idea of light and dark, you can have something like these light and dark striped zebras. You might think about having a night scene where you've got very contrasting darks and then some big bright splashes of light. That's certainly giving you contrast. So we could think of it in terms of lights and darks, or values. So having strong contrast in your values can give you a really good contrast in your paintings, but there's so many more ways you can do it. In last month's painting, which was of the mountain scene with the rock, what gave us contrast here were different angles. So we had big solid rocks, we had sharp pointing mountains, we had flat horizontal ground, we had the round forms of the azalea bushes, and then we had these very strong vertical lines from the trees. So we're getting a lot of contrast there from the shapes. The shapes or the masses within our painting. So already we've got two different ways of adding contrast. Another very recognisable way of adding contrast is through colour. And so down here you can see four paintings that all have a blue, yellow, yellowy, orange, blues and yellows. Now with complementary colours you get a really good contrast. So these orange blues, yellowy blues give you a very good contrast already, but within those four different paints there are other areas of contrast. So we could say that colour gives you contrast as well, using complementaries. And that might be complementaries within your painting. It might be complementaries with an underpainting, and we're going to talk about underpaintings this month. I've got a skill builder on underpaintings, which will explain all the different ways you can do it. But for acrylics or pastel, you can make an underpainting, and that can add to the contrast. So maybe we'll add that in as well. And when we do an underpainting, we can do it in many ways, and they'll be discussed. I'll show you 5 different ways and 5 different mediums that you can create an underpainting with. One of the ways we could create some more contrast is by adding texture. So let's pop down texture here. And you're saying to yourself, pastels, texture, I don't understand that. Acrylics, yes, we can add the texture gel. How do we add texture with pastels? Well, what we're going to do is add in objects that have different textures within our painting. So here we've got a rough stone wall, we've got round circular shapes and triangular shapes on the bike, so we've got shape contrast. But we've also got these soft masses of flowers, and they're in strong contrast to all the hard stone, man-made features that we have in that. So we're adding texture and contrast through the different textured objects that are represented in our painting. We talked about lights and darks and values, and down here you can see some good examples of them. Strong contrast between light and dark. So using shadows and patterns is another really good way of adding contrast. So we have up here the light and dark value contrast. Here we have patterns from the light and dark, the way the shadows are falling on the shoes and on here and then on the patio and through the arches. So patterns can add contrast in our paintings as well. A very classic example here is, here we have a fairly uninteresting, uninspiring photo. It's just sky, some clouds, some surf, and a little bit of sand. It's all just in blues and mauves and whites. Not very interesting. We put in suddenly something that has a different sort of mass, a different shape. It's more rounded, and then there's some angles in it. It contrasts sharply with these flat horizontal masses within the painting reference. Then we put in added colour. So we've got all these oranges against the blues. So immediately we get another strong contrast. This is fairly, if you squint, there's a darker band there, but all the rest of it's fairly flat and very light valued. Suddenly here we're changing, we've got some very strong lights and darks against each other. So putting the lights and darks right against each other sets up really strong contrast. Of course, there are other ways we can add contrast. We talked about shapes and masses, and maybe against that I'll put edges. And by that I mean we might have some very sharp, well-defined edges, and you can see in this one, on the arch and the little silhouettes, it's very sharp and well-defined. But as you move back into the buildings that are in the distance, they're not quite so sharp, so you get a contrast between those. So we just have talked about how to add contrast with lights and darks, so by changing our values, by changing the shapes and the masses and the edges, by using colour complementaries to give a good strong colour contrast, using underpaintings, adding texture, and through patterns. Lots of different ways to add our contrast. I'm going to show you now the reference I've chosen for June's pastel demonstration, and it's this one here, and I've chosen it because for a number of reasons. Firstly, I don't demonstrate very many animals, so I thought it was time I did some for those of you who are interested in animal painting. Within this painting we have this reference, we have fantastic contrast between the lights and the darks, so that's one contrast. We have contrast between textures. We have this very organic texture of the straw against a smooth texture of the wood. Although it has some rough marks, it's much smoother than the grass. That's very linear. This is very organic. Then we have the fur of the goats, which is moving around quite a lot, lots of different directions in that. These curves, we're adding in a different shape. We have all the straights, the horizontals. We have these jagged, sharp marks from the straw. Then we have round marks and shapes here on the end of the logs. We have a lot of linear straights. And then we have these lovely curves on the animals, the curves of the horns, the curving ears, little curves around their knee joints. Then we have some really nice touches of highlights on the bell here, the lights against the darks, little curves there on the buckles with really light against them. We've got the lovely dark interior which the goats' heads are silhouetted against. So there's a lot of range of contrast in that between lights and darks, between the shapes and the forms and the masses, and between man-made and organic items, objects in there. There's not so much of that complementary colour contrast that we talked about, so you don't always have to get your contrast through colours. But within the wood there's some nice warm colours and some cooler colours, so we'll play up some of the cool and warm contrasts there as well. Another reason I've chosen this is because there are a lot of neutrals in it, and last month I gave you some advice about how to mix neutrals with your pastels if you don't have many grade colours. So this is an opportunity to do some of that colour mixing and using some greys and some neutrals to get a wonderfully contrasting painting with a lot of interest without using bright colours. I hope you've enjoyed this little lesson about adding contrast in different ways to your paintings, and that you'll be able to enjoy seeing the demonstration of the goats and then having a go at something like that. You can use this one because I've posted the reference photo, or you can use a different reference but with the same idea of adding some strong contrast in some way into your paintings.